Okay, this is the statistics practice that we did in class. This is just an explanation to make sure you're on the right track. This first one gave you tuitions for 10 universities in Virginia, and you're asked to find the mean, variance, and standard deviation. So this is one where I definitely suggest doing it in your calculator. These big numbers, it's going to be a lot harder by hand. So don't forget, if I'm asking for the mean mu, that's the same thing as x bar that comes up in your calculator. So when you put it in your list 1 and do one variable statistics, you get 8,961.2, because that makes sense with the change. And then don't forget standard deviation is the little sigma. And for this one it's 1,458.68. And then variance, your calculator doesn't give you variance, but if you remember when we found it by hand, we found the variance first and then took the square root to get standard deviation. So we can just go backwards. Instead, we can square the standard deviation to get the variance, which is 2,127,747. But the more important part, don't forget, is the standard deviation, because that actually tells us how spread out our data is. Okay, for this one, you had to do both classes separately. So we have, again, retake scores for an algebra test, and you have mod 1 and mod 2. So you're asked to find the mean and standard deviation for both. And don't forget, in the calculator, this is going to be x bar. So for class 1, you should have gotten 81.2 with a standard deviation of 6.84. And for class 2, you should have gotten a mean of 72.6 with a standard deviation of 9.84. So don't forget what that actually means. On average, this class got an 81 with an average of about 7 points away from that score. And the second class had an average of a 72 with about 10 points on average away from that score. So which class is more widely spread out from the mean, and how do you know? So remember, standard deviation is relative to the mean. So it doesn't matter how far this number actually is from this number. All it matters is that this standard deviation is bigger than this standard deviation. So that tells me that on average the second class is more spread out, just because the standard deviation is bigger. Okay, for this one, scientists are studying the differences between crocodiles and alligators. The length of 6 crocodiles are recorded in feet. Find the mean and standard deviation of these lengths. So again, if you do it in your calculator, you get 19.9 feet as the average, the mean, and standard deviation is 2.15 feet. So then B says the lengths of 6 alligators are recorded. The results give a mean of 6.8 feet and a standard deviation of 1.85 feet. In comparing the mean of the crocodiles and alligators, what is one valid conclusion you can make? So alligators have a smaller average length than crocodiles, according to this data. So that's one conclusion. So again, on average, crocodiles are longer than alligators. And then in comparing the standard deviation, so comparing that number and that number, what's one valid conclusion you can make? So the lengths of crocodiles are more spread out on average than the lengths of alligators, because they have a slightly bigger standard deviation than the standard deviation for alligators. Okay, and the last one, students in 4 different classes ran the mile, and the mean and standard deviation in minutes are listed below. And each class has an equal number of students. Decide which class matches each of the following descriptions. So times within this class were very similar and closest in value. So basically I'm just looking for the smallest standard deviation, because the smaller the standard deviation, the closer together the values are. So it doesn't matter what the average or the mean was. I'm just concerned about how far from the average they are. So period 3 was the closest in value, the least spread out. And then the second one says the times in this class were very different and had the largest average spread of data. So I'm just looking for the biggest standard deviation. So 4.2 is the biggest. Again, I don't really care what the mean is, the average, but 4.2 tells me that they were the most spread out on average. And